Everyone loves surprises, right? So let's talk surprises as we dive in for another BPTV. Cory McCartney, along with Grant McAuley, and the Braves played 14 straight games versus AL teams, each one a postseason contender, by the way, followed by two of the last three teams to represent the NL in the World Series. Of course, the Braves being the other. It's been a gauntlet, but the world the Braves have been living in since early May. But despite a losing record amid that stretch going into Memorial Day weekend and losing Max Fried and Kyle Wright along the way, they maintain the largest division lead in baseball. And Grant, that may not even be the most surprising part of the last month, as Bryce Elder is currently the NL's ERA leader, and Marcell Ozuna has that player of the month look.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that have been happening in the month of May. Some of them good, some of them not so good. Some of them you're just going to have to figure out a way to get through until you can get some players back. And we've been talking about injuries all season long, but yeah, the Braves have managed to find a way to maintain, and they've always been a resilient club, and that's been one of the big traits of this team under Brian Snitker's watch, and they continue to find a way to do that. Outside of a series in Toronto where it just felt like, they shouldn't have been swept, the Sunday game got away from them. They had a chance to maybe take 2 out of 3 from the Dodgers, particularly if game one swings a different way. This is a club that's been at least in it. You haven't seen them go into long funks. They haven't gone into a long losing streak. And even though they've had their challenges during that 14-game interleague gauntlet, a date with the Dodgers, and now 4-game series with the Phillies, the Braves continue to do at least enough to put themselves exactly where they want to be. And talking to a lot of those guys this week, they don't really feel like they've hit their stride yet. So when we consider flashing back to about a year ago this time, when the Braves needed a 14-game winning streak to get their season on track, all things considered, they're in a pretty nice little place.
It's no surprise after a top 10 MVP finish a year ago, but it's a welcome sight for Austin Riley after his month-long slump to see him break out, including 2 homers off of Aaron Nola on Thursday that made Riley just the 3rd player in the StatCast era with 2 homers in the same game of at least 455 feet. He joins Charlie Blackmon, Wilson Contreras, and Trevor Story. But let's extol a little more oxygen on those actual surprises, beginning with Bryce Elder. He's sitting atop the NL with a 2.01 ERA through 10 starts, is tied for 21st among qualified starters with a 1.2 F4. Grant, we had our skepticism last season when he put together a great closing stretch and starts against the Marlins and Nationals. We had some concerns when he was optioned at spring training earlier than anyone expected. But Elder's last 4 outings have been against the Orioles, Blue Jays, Mariners, and Dodgers, and he allowed no more than 2 runs in any of those starts.
Yeah, I mean, he just keeps doing it, and by whatever means necessary. I know a lot of people, and you pull up the StatCast data and you look at it, and it is confusing, to say the very least, as to how he's having this much success with a lot of peripherals that don't necessarily tell you, or a lot of analytics or deeper metrics that don't exactly indicate that you should expect the kind of numbers that we're seeing from him. But one thing Bryce Elder knows is his arsenal and his plan, and that's what he's been going out there and executing. He's working on the margins of the strike zone. He's just not making a lot of mistakes over the plate that are getting, pulverized. He's not getting punished for them. I think the defense has been helpful, though Atlanta's defense this year has been at times a little bit suspect. But for whatever reason, Bryce Elder, he works at a good pace. He stays around the strike zone. I know Ozzy Albies said, I love playing behind this guy because he just goes to work, and we're always ready to help him out. So, whatever, again, by whatever means necessary, Bryce Elder's getting it done. I don't know how long it can last at this level, but to say that he could be a useful piece in Atlanta's rotation, I think he's proven that several times over, and I'm interested to see how everything's going to line up as Atlanta starts to welcome back some of its other arms, because, we've got a lot of baseball left to be played, and perhaps a comeback story or 3 could be in line for the Atlanta rotation, depending on where you sit on Max Fried, Kyle Wright, and that Michael Soroka guy. It's going to be very fascinating.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the StatCast stuff, because the hard hit rate's about 42.8%, which is in the bottom 6% of the league. Obviously, that doesn't seem to speak to things being long-term effective. But I mean, Elder has been huge in the Braves having the NL's second best rotation F4, and a lot of it has been about a change in his pitch arsenal. Over his 54 innings last year, he really leaned on that sinker. He used a 2-seamer 42.5% of the time. The slider was a secondary pitch for him, is at 26.9. Now he's nearly equal usage on those pitches. 38.8% slider, 35.7% sinker. Opponents are hitting 151 against his slider with a 32% whiff rate. Now, you base that off run value, which is measured by the impact of a pitch based on the runners on base, outs the count. It's currently the best slider in baseball. That's one aspect of this. I just don't think anyone saw coming just a change in the arsenal and how much that was going to mean for the effectiveness of Bryce Elder.
Yeah, but sometimes it's the small things that you change, and having faith in a pitch also. I mean, we've talked about a lot of young pitchers coming up for the Braves since the rebuild, honestly, And do they have conviction to throw certain pitches? I think that's even been a question with Ian Anderson in trying to, figure out what third pitch he was going to throw that was going to help make him effective second and third time through a lineup. Bryce Elder has conviction in all his pitches. He'll throw them in just about any count. And I think another thing that he's doing that probably makes that slider more effective is, yes, he's throwing it more, but picking different counts and pitching to hitters in different ways. I mean, just the way that he is going about things, clearly the sequencing has to be part of the effectiveness of Bryce Elder. It can't just be about luck, whether that's good luck or bad luck for this guy. He is doing some things that have a value, intrinsic or otherwise, to his success. And, he's found a way to do it. I know talking in the finale against the Dodgers to Oral Hershiser, who knows a thing or two about pitching prior to that game, he asked, he's like, how's he doing this? Because I'm looking at these numbers and I'm not quite sure. And I said, just watch how he goes about it, and you'll start to see a little bit about what makes Bryce Elder so effective. He just doesn't make a lot of mistakes. And if he does, it's the kind of hard contact that you can live with, not the kind that goes, 450 feet and costs you 3 runs every time you make one.
Well, these past 2 seasons, I mean, Marcell Ozuna has been one of Braves Twitter's top targets. Certainly what's happened off the field has played a part, but Ozuna did not exactly help himself with what he's done since leading the NL in homers and RBI back in the 2020 season. Over the past 2 seasons combined, his -0.8 F4 is the 7th worst among qualified batters. He hit 16% below league average in that span. You combine that with the off-field issues and a contract that has him under club control through the potential of 2025, and the ire is understandable for Braves country. He was hitting 0.85 at the end of April, and this season looked like it was going to be a continuation of that. But Grant, you go back to the start of the months in that this month in that road trip to Miami, and it has been a very, very different story for Marcell Ozuna.
It definitely has. And you had to kind of wonder, that Miami series, was that going to be like a fever dream where he goes down there, he's familiar with it, he's in a ballpark that he's played in before, pops 3 home runs, gets a handful of hits, and then all of a sudden maybe it reverts back to, because the change, the switch that was flipped, it was so sudden. It was like, it wasn't just turning the lights on. It was like turning a floodlight on. And Marcell Ozuna is finally able to see things the way that he needs to see things. But I think there have been some very real changes to his pitch selection, or selectivity at the plate, I should say, and the way that he is driving the ball to all fields. That's something that is playing a huge part into his success. And typically when we're talking about anybody either getting going, getting out of a slump, or just being at their absolute best, you're usually seeing, especially with power hitters, gap-to-gap kind of power. And Ozuna has the kind of power to hit it out of any ballpark in just about any count. So that's what we're starting to see, is he's gotten back to who I think he was, the essence of him as a hitter. 2022 was a very bad example of that. His walk rate absolutely cratered. He was not a useful hitter unless he was hitting home runs. And even with 25 or so home runs, he wasn't a hitter that was giving you enough to feel like he needed to get everyday at bats. That has all changed in the month of May. I chatted with Braves hitting coach Kevin Seitzer about Ozuna and some of the other Atlanta hitters, and he said, nobody has worked harder than Marcell. And Marcell is himself has said, look, I feel like I have a chance now because I've been doing all of the work, and now I'm confident that when I come to the plate, I'm able to do the things that I'm accustomed to doing. That confidence, I think, plays a big part in it, but the hard work is what it took to get him over that hump. And the selectivity at the plate, I think, is also playing a big factor in this. So you just look at everything that he's been able to do and everything that's going right for him this month. It just kind of feels like he feels like himself again. And that, I don't think, can be overstated as the importance of anybody at the plate, or really anywhere on the diamond, to be confident in what you're doing. And maybe he's just been able to recapture a little bit of that, in addition to recapturing that slugging form.
Yeah, well, his numbers certainly bear it out. Only Lourdes Gurriel, Nolan Gorman, Juan Soto, and Luis Robert have a better weighted run created plus in this month so far than Ozuna at 206. He's hitting 343, 421, 746 in the month with 8 homers. Has a better F4 right now than he had in 2021 and 2022 combined.
Yeah,
he's always been an exit velo monster in StatCast, but the expected weighted on base average, the expected slugging, even over the past 2 seasons, those spoke to him eventually getting back on track, and we're seeing it now. You mentioned it's hard to argue with the plate discipline here. Along with the best walk rate since 2020, Ozuna's chase rate is currently better than any of his other big league seasons. Yeah. So remember, for 2 seasons, this is a guy who was the number 3, number 4 hitter in this Braves lineup. He may not stay down at number 7, especially if this production continues. But in the meantime, Grant, a resurgent Ozuna hitting in that spot creates a lot of uncomfortable at bats, and for a lot more people than just Will Smith.
Yeah, and the length of the lineup. And yes, I think that there was an uncomfortability, if that's a word, for catchers around the league occasionally when that backswing gets a little bit long. But I'm going to put that over to the side because I think we have, moved on past that little swing gate, if we'll call it. But yeah, this is the Braves lineup that, you've been waiting to see Austin Riley get going, which you mentioned a little bit earlier. Obviously, Ronald Acuna Jr. is having an MVP caliber season, but you want to see threats all the way through. Sean Murphy coming up big this year has been another thing that's been very nice to see. I think Matt Olson has certainly had his moments. I don't think he's played his best baseball yet. We haven't seen him get on really one of those hot streaks that he can. You start to do the math about where do you go for outs in this lineup. You want to get Michael Harris a little bit more reestablished. I think Eddie Rosario has shown signs this year. And Orlando Arcia, as far as I'm concerned, has given you a little bit more than maybe you even expected out of him. And healthy Ozzy Albies. Let's throw that all in there. So it's not just Ozuna in this lineup, but where he hits and what he's doing right now. Opposing teams can't just be feeling like, okay, if we get past Acuna, Olson, and Riley, maybe Murphy, and get down past the fifth spot of the order, all right, we can kind of settle in here and maybe we can keep this Braves offense off balance and off the board. That just doesn't seem to be happening with the way Ozuna has been swinging the bat in the month of May.
Well, I mentioned gauntlets early on with the schedule. The Braves lineup has the potential to be absolutely that. They are spending Memorial Day weekend in a 4-game series with the Phillies. Atlanta taking the opener behind 917 feet of Austin Riley home runs. Jared Schuster gets the ball Friday versus Taijuan Walker as the series continues. Zach Wheeler and Charlie Morton on Saturday. Spencer Strider on Sunday. The Phillies have yet to announce a starter for that game. Grant, Braves country doesn't have to be reminded that these Phillies ended Atlanta's season a year ago. Obviously, this is one series, their first meeting of the season for these NL East rivals. But there's some significance here because Memorial Day is kind of that time where you can start to say it's no longer early. Small sample sizes are getting a little bit bigger. These Phillies have not lived up to expectations so far. So this series, it kind of feels like it's about momentum, and the Braves can go a long way to keeping the Phillies from gaining any of it.
Yeah, they definitely can. I mean, if they take this series from the Phillies, taking 3 out of 4, the Nationals haven't been playing altogether bad baseball. So you could conceivably be looking at a Phillies team that could be in the cellar of the National League East, depending on the outcome of a lot of other games in the not too distant future. They have not been able to get on track. Having Bryce Harper back in record time from Tommy John surgery, I kind of thought that was going to be the spark that got this club going. And it did momentarily. I think they went on a little streak, but then all of that momentum seemed to go away. They've got some pitching problems in rotation. Their bullpen has been leaky as usual. We saw it again. The Braves took advantage of it in the opener of the series on Thursday. This is a team that has a big payroll, a lot of expectations, and I will say it just on their behalf. There's a lot of baseball left to be played, and they did play some of their better baseball in the second half a year ago to find their way into the postseason and clearly go on the run. So you can't rule them out. And if we do get in our way back machine to a year ago this time, the Braves, again, had to go on that long winning streak at the end of May and into June to even get their season on track. So it can happen. There is precedent for it. But this does look like a Phillies club that has been searching in the early going. Trey Turner has not been the kind of impact player that they would like. Again, it's only been a couple of months, but there are some things that the Phillies are going to have to address if they want to find their way back to October again.
Well, the last time Charlie Morton faced the Phillies, he didn't make it out of the second inning in the worst postseason start of his career. So don't tell me he isn't thinking about that when he comes in wielding that resurgent curveball. After the Phillies, the Braves are jet setting their way to scenic Oakland before an intriguing 3 games against the Diamondbacks. And we'll be back to set the stage for that trip to Arizona next time. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe, turn notifications, and tell a friend to help keep BPTV growing. Until then, I'm Cory McCartney. He's Grant McAuley, and we'll see you soon, Braves Country.